Good evening, everyone. James Hancock here. I'm back to review Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. This movie's in wide release now, so I'll definitely be discussing spoilers later in my review. But if you just want to know straight from the outset what I think in general terms before I say anything specific, I'll say that the film is a strange mix of ingredients, some pretty good, some downright awful. If you're not familiar with the premise, the story features a loose alliance of costumed crooks and vigilantes in Gotham who decide to join forces when they realize they share a common enemy, Black Mask. Now, as a lifelong comic book reader, I tend to prefer movies that are a little bit more faithful to the source material, but also recognize that the superhero genre needs to have room for experimental new takes to avoid total creative stagnation. And I'd argue that some of director Cathy Yann's creative gambles do pay off, while others absolutely do not. Toward the beginning of the movie, I found myself having a surprisingly good time. I love the performances of Margot Robbie, Journey Smollett-Bell, and Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and I was getting into the movie. But then as the plot really got underway, there were these scenes and performances that were so bad that I had to kind of fight the urge to walk out of the movie entirely. Now, I'll get to all the specific details that I liked and disliked in a second, but I imagine what's more important to some viewers is how this film plays into the ongoing culture wars. We're in this strange moment right now where online battles surrounding the reception of films is of far more importance to people than actually watching the movies themselves. Superhero movies are obviously insanely popular right now, and over the last few years, they've unfortunately been sucked into this black hole of ideological warfare that dominates so much of online culture. Personally, I never got into movies to discuss politics. When I was in college, I thought politics were fucking boring, and I looked at movies the same way a lot of people look at sex, drugs, and rock and roll, essentially aesthetic experiences that are capable of giving me intense pleasure and joy. Nothing makes me feel the generation gap more than when I see young people who have absolutely no use for art or entertainment and only look at movies, books, games, songs, whatever, as either enemies or allies in whatever their causes might be. Case in point would be the so-called critics who tried to act as if the movie Joker was some form of existential threat to society, even as it racked up $1 billion in box office and more Oscar nominations than any other movie competing this year. A lot of these same wet blankets who rang the alarm bell over Joker are now acting as if Birds of Prey is some sort of primal scream fighting the good fight against casual everyday misogyny. Whatever political agenda Birds of Prey might have has been wildly overstated by these sections of the media. The reality is that the film is way too incoherent and messy to actually serve as any form of obnoxious political activism. Now, I know there's an audience out there that actually does like obnoxious political activism. They prefer agenda-driven movies where well-intentioned, earnest filmmakers force-feed people ideas that they think are good for them, oftentimes hijacking beloved fictional characters and classic franchises in the process. I'm not entirely sure how big that audience is, but for whatever reason, there's some people out there who actually like to be preached to or even hectored. It makes them feel all noble and superior. These are the kinds of people who count lines in movies spoken by certain demographics, but would be completely incapable of explaining or understanding what makes a single line of dialogue more impactful or memorable over another. My attitude was, is, and always will be that a kick-ass story featuring amazing characters brought to life by a visionary filmmaker will always have more value and applicability to viewers and better serves whatever causes they might believe in. Case in point would be Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill Volumes 1 and 2 and Death Proof, wildly entertaining girl power movies that are far more effective at some of the things that Birds of Prey sets out to do. Admittedly, politics and creativity are not mutually exclusive, but we see examples every year where lesser filmmakers trip over their own feet, trying to juggle all of their various agendas at the expense of an entertaining story. What's surprising on Birds of Prey, though, was that the film actually has far less of the overt messaging that I had been led to believe would be front and center. Yes, the movie has self-congratulatory, hacky lines where characters criticize white people, clearly expecting the wokest of the woke to give the film a pat on the back. I couldn't care less about those lines. I have a thick skin, and I've heard far worse with far more creativity from some people that have been my friends for decades. But it'll be interesting to see what impact that kind of pandering has on the film's performance. Hollywood might lean left, but their first and only religion has always been money. And if Birds of Prey makes $1 less than Joker worldwide, some folks at Warner Brothers are going to take note. But with all my sanctimonious BS out of the way, let's get into all the little details that make this film such a perplexing and uneven movie-going experience. Let's start with what I enjoyed. Margot Robbie absolutely nailed it. Twice now, she's been the most interesting part of deeply flawed superhero movies, and as long as she keeps playing the character, I'll keep showing up. Her accent's a little inconsistent, but I love how she totally embraces her dark side, in particular in early scenes where she's keeping her recent breakup with Joker a secret so that she can continue to go out at night and get totally wasted and raise hell around Gotham without anybody challenging her in any way. And in the fight scenes, she shows off a variety of some really cool acrobatic moves throughout the movie. I particularly enjoyed one fight scene where she goes berserk with a baseball bat in ways, making it seem almost as versatile a weapon as Cap's shield over in the MCU. But whether she's crying over her bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich getting ruined, or kicking people's asses in roller derby, or using cocaine to find her focus in battle, Margot Robbie was a blast to watch in action, and I'd place her performance right up there with Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. As I mentioned before, I also really liked Jurnee Smollett-Bell and Mary Elizabeth Winstead. While the comic book nerd in me would have loved to have seen their classic costumes, which are personal favorites, although if you look closely, you'll see Dinah Lance rocking out her fishnet stockings while performing on stage. But suffice to say, both actresses absolutely brought their A-game with far less screen time to work with than Margot Robbie. I think Mary Elizabeth Winstead was actually far funnier than Margot Robbie, but also maintained the perfect gravitas and cool dramatic poses when she's shooting folks with her crossbow. I'd be all for seeing Huntress and Black Canary reunite in a Birds of Prey spinoff or sequel, which would be the perfect opportunity to unveil a new look for both of them. When it comes to the villains, Ewan McGregor and Chris Messina were pretty good as well, and vicious in ways that I really enjoyed. There's no tiptoeing around the fact that Black Mask, he likes cutting off people's faces, while Victor Zsasz likes keeping tabs of all the women he's killed by carving marks in his flesh. Now, both of these interpretations of the character are pretty radical departures from the comic, but there are some good scenes. Like at one point, Black Mask considers sparing one of his victims until he sees this disgusting snot bubble coming out of their nostril, which grosses him out, making him change his mind, so off with their face. We haven't seen anything remotely this sadistic in the world of Marvel, and it was a very refreshing change of pace. The downside of these characters is that when Black Mask finally goes into costume, the mask looks like it was picked up by a production assistant at some local drugstore. And unfortunately, Zsasz is killed off before getting to do anything too spectacular. One really great fight scene would have helped, especially since this movie doesn't feature one decent fighter in all of Black Mask's army. They jump around a lot and make a big spectacle of themselves, but if you watch the fights closely, most of Black Mask's henchmen politely stand around waiting for their turn for when one of the heroes will step in and kick them in the face. But let's get into the things where I thought the film needed a lot more work. Now, this wounds me to say this, but Rosie Perez and the character of Renee Montoya, they were absolutely wasted on this movie. After seeing her in White Men Can't Jump back in the day, I had a serious teenage crush on Rosie Perez, and she gave us a legendary performance in Spike Lee's movie Do the Right Thing. But in Birds of Prey, she just seemed so stiff and lifeless. She just seemed out of place overall. Almost like she doesn't quite know what to do with the character, and including her in the fight scenes was also a terrible call in that she's totally incapable of selling us on her athleticism. But that would have been totally fine if she'd just been standing around in a trench coat looking like a badass and intimidating people with her words. In the comics, the character of Renee Montoya is such a complete, total badass, but this movie didn't even begin to do justice to her character. Hopefully, at some point, Warner Brothers will simply put together a proper Gotham Central movie or streaming show and get the character right. But the real Achilles heel of this movie is Ella J. Basco as Cassandra Cain. Now, some might say it's cruel and heartless to criticize a kid in a movie, but she simply can't act at all. She is less than amateur. How she got through the casting process is just bewildering to me. She's so stiff, so awkward, and even worse, so completely, utterly lacking in any charisma of any kind that for me, she straight up ruins the movie. And the movie has the audacity to pretend as if she's some sort of master pickpocket, but anytime we see her action, she just kind of walks up to people and clumsily shoves her hand into their pockets and yanks their belongings away with zero skill or technique of any kind. I live in New York. If she tried that shit here, people would beat her to death in a matter of minutes. And the reality is that this movie has so many fantastic characters already interacting with one another that removing Renee Montoya and Cassandra Cain from the film and saving them for another movie would have been the best call to make. And before that happens, I strongly recommend that somebody actually read a comic with Cassandra Cain so that the character can vaguely kind of sort of resemble what we've seen on the page. And when it comes to the overall structure of the movie feels wildly inconsistent. For every highly stylish scene with great visuals and energy, there will be several others where the momentum of the movie comes to a complete and total screeching halt. The tone of the movie also, unfortunately, becomes increasingly silly as the film progresses, erasing any sense of the stakes that were established early in the movie. There's this giant fight scene in a funhouse leading up to the climax of the film that disintegrates into total camp, making the entire scene feel pointless. What the movie really needed was one badass fighter on the opposing side to give us something like this classic face-off from The Night Comes For Us. Personally, I'd rather watch that scene on a loop for 2 hours than watch Birds of Prey. But also, Birds of Prey is already rated R due to language and people getting their faces hacked off, so why not go all the way with some hardcore fight scenes? But my last criticism is that this world barely feels like it was set in Gotham. We've seen so many great interpretations of Gotham over the years, with creators like Christopher Nolan, Tim Burton, and Bruce Timm bringing the city to life. Not to mention the thousands of comics where the cities appeared. Because I think Gotham is one of the best fictional settings in all of pop culture with infinite storytelling possibilities, but the Gotham of this movie just felt like any other city. But speaking of Bruce Timm and comics, if you want to read a genuine classic Harley Quinn story, check out Mad Love from 1994. You won't be disappointed. So I think that's all I got for now. I think I've gotten all my petty gripes out of my system. There is a lot about this movie to enjoy and to love, but I just feel like there's a much better movie hiding within it if they just hadn't made some of the bad decisions, like including Cassandra Cain in this film. I really can't say enough bad things about her performance, but I'm going to go ahead and sign off before I say any more mean things about a young child actress. But if you want to talk more or argue or discuss or whatever, you can always leave a comment in the comments below or give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrax. I'm there day or night. But I can't thank you enough for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel. I would really appreciate it. But hope everyone has a good time at the movies this weekend. Thanks as always for watching. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.